Good afternoon. My pleasure to be back with you. Today, I want us to discuss tenancy law in Nigeria and the rights of the tenants. Now, our laws have made enough provisions to protect the tenant and also the landlord if you care. For instance, under the tenancy laws of our different states, one thing is settled that if you're a yearly tenant, your tenancy runs for a year, you pay on a yearly basis. Now, if the landlord decides to terminate your tenancy, it is upon that landlord to ensure that you are giving the requisite notice. In this case, it will be 6 months notice before the expiry of the rent. It will be 6 months notice before the expiry of the rent. If the rent is still running, then 6 months, regardless of whether the rent expired in the course of the month of the time, the duration of the notice. But once the tenancy has expired, the rent has expired, then the tenant is entitled to only a notice of owner's intention to recover possession because his tenancy has been determined by operation of law. And so he cannot insist on a 6 months notice at that time. And you see that the tendency, the attitude, and the tendency of tenants is to expect that because they are tenants paying their rent yearly, regardless of whether their rent has expired or not, they expect to be given 6 months notice. So that if someone's rent has expired, let's say in August, and the landlord wants to recover his property, the tenant is still expecting that the landlord will give him 6 months notice. And most times, if the landlord falls into that trap, you find the tenant refusing to pay the rent for that 6 months. That is not the law. A tenant is entitled to 6 months. Quite right. That is, a yearly tenant is entitled to 6 months notice, but that is when the rent is still running. In that case, the rent and the notice runs pari passu. They run together alongside each other. But once the rent has expired, the landlord is not required to give another 6 months notice. And then after the 6 months has elapsed, the landlord and the tenant is still holding over. The landlord is then required to give another 7 days notice of owner's intention to recover possession. And afterwards, if the tenant is still holding over, that means he has not vacated, then the landlord can go to court to seek for his right to possession of the property. And if the tenant is in arrears of rent, also claim the arrears. See, the point of this is to avoid self-help. Self-help will normally lead to a breakdown of law and order, and it is expected that both the landlord and the tenant will work to ensure orderliness in the society. So, however, if it's a leasehold interest that was created, leases are governed by the common law rules. The tenancy or the lease continues to run for the duration or for the term specified in the lease, and that lease is a notice on its own to the lessee, to the tenant, as to when his lease will expire. So when the lease expires and the landlord fails or refuses or declines to renew the lease, the lessee is also only entitled to 7 days notice of owner's intention to recover possession. And the basis will be on a fluxion of time. The lease has run out. So I believe that this is instructive, and we have taken note of the points You are welcome.